Nice. We are ready to go. Yeah, we've got like an hour together or so. So I want to keep my introduction really short because Talmud has the expertise and experience and so much wisdom to share with us here this evening. It's going to be amazing. We just had a brief conversation there and already fascinated by what he's got to share. So obviously we're here tonight for the MOE Digital Academy on cultural awareness, the power of micro inequities, and how to create an inclusive culture. And Talmud just said to say, he's going to give an introduction into himself and what he's been up to over the years and what makes him a real expert in this field. Um, but he just mentioned to say that, he's a consultant in inclusion, working across many market sectors. So, yeah, without further ado, I'm just going to let Talmud lead the way. Looking forward
Brilliant,
to it.
John. Thank you so much. So welcome everyone. Welcome this evening. Really glad to be here with you all. Pleasure to be back with Mo. I connected with Mo maybe 12 years ago, back in 2013. My journey to this space was quite grassroots. I used to work for a charity called the MOE Foundation. I helped develop what's called their Safe Havens program, and it's through my work with them that I connected with the MOE Foundation. My background's very much a mixture of human behaviour, education, and counselling. So my work I do now is looking at building inclusive cultures, inclusive leadership, organizational culture, and organizational well-being, covering topics of course, ethnic diversity, gender equity, neurodivergency, accessibility, empowerment, behavior, kind of quite a few things. So in this time this evening, I'm going to give you as much information as possible. And my approach is this. On the journey to what I do now, I've come across many practices and experiences which some people found really beneficial. In my time with you, I'm going to share some of those things, but also be open to discourse. So because of the time, I would invite you to maybe just absorb and listen first. And I'm going to leave some time, maybe 15, 20 minutes at the end for us to have a conversation. That being said, if things come up for you, please note it down or put it in the chat, and either Jane or John will reference it afterwards. So if everyone's good, we'll get started. Please call me Tao for short as well, by the way. Call me Tao. And I'm just going to share my screen with you good people. All right. All right. All right. So everyone can see my screen, right? Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. All right. Just before we start, I'll just remind you to mute your mics so there isn't any feedback or anything like that. Thank you. So welcome to Cultural Awareness, the power of micro inequities and building an inclusive culture. And yeah, that's me. And you know about me. So overview of what we're going to cover in the session. We're going to look at vision, values, and goals, understanding cultural awareness. What is an inclusive culture? What do we mean by equality, diversity, and inclusion? Equalities Act, protected characteristics, recognizing and understanding bias, who do we trust, understanding the barriers to inclusion, and the power of micro-inequities and micro-behaviours, and defining conscious inclusion from bias to inclusion. I always love to be ambitious, and we should all get it all in. Okay, a bit of etiquette. It's going to be interactive, so although I'll be speaking, sharing with you for the most part, at the end of it, we're going to have a good conversation. Also, it's going to be a supportive environment. Speak freely. There's been no judgment here. This is a safe space, and it'll stay within the session as well. Confidential. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So if you want to keep it in here, keep it in here. But also, we'll kind of figure out at the end, or you can talk to Jane in terms of if you want it excluded from the video. But always aspirational. What can we learn? How can we grow? And just before we begin, please have a reflective moment, reflective check-in. Just take 30 seconds to reflect on your current mood and feeling. How are you feeling? Just before you jumped on the call, what were you doing? What were you thinking about? Are you in the right place to receive new new thinking and ideas? How open are you? Just take a breath to put yourself in the room and be present in this time. One thing which is absolutely true, we'll never be in this moment again. We'll never be in this experience again. Even if I see you again, it won't be like this. And maybe reflect on what your desired outcome is. What would you like to take away from this process? And it's a personal thing. What would you like to take away? And sometimes if you set an intention to learn something, you definitely will come away with a takeaway. Okay. So what is cultural awareness? So cultural awareness is the ability to understand and respect the values, beliefs, and customs of people from other cultures. It also involves being aware of how these cultural differences shape our own behavior and decisions. And why is it important? Well, it can help people build stronger relationships and a sense of belonging. It can improve communication and collaboration between people from different backgrounds. It can help create more inclusive and equitable workplaces and communities. And it can help build and help people to appreciate the value of others who are different from them. And it's interesting, for example, even if you don't look at anything that is visibly different, okay, even in, say, a homogenous group where everyone's maybe the same ethnicity, you're going to have a lot of diversity in there. You have regional diversity. You could be northern, you could be from Manchester, you could be from Southeast London, you could be from Scotland. Well, there are different things, and even within a community, you have generational differences. So there are a lot of internal differences anyway. Before you look at the ethnic diversity or the neurodiversity in a group. So how do we build an inclusive culture? So an organization's climate, culture, and behaviors allow people to feel that they are valued, accepted at work, belong within their team in the organization, can be themselves without having to conform, hide, or change themselves to fit the organizational norms. Okay, so that's ideally what an inclusive culture is. Through the course of this, we'll look at what steps need to take to arrive at that. So what do we mean by equality, diversity, inclusion? I always like to just look at that because it can mean different things to different people. Some people might say, "Oh, we're incredibly diverse. We've got people from Spain, from Ukraine, from Denmark, from UK, from Ireland, mega diverse." But then it is diverse of a nature. You could then argue, well, how many of those people um, happen to have use a wheelchair, or happen to be visually or hearing impaired, or happen to be from a diverse ethnicity. So it could be very Eurocentric, but diverse in that sense. It might not be diverse to people, say, from Asia or Caribbean or South America. So it's interesting to ask the question. So EDI ensures fair treatment and opportunity for all. It aims to eradicate prejudice and discrimination because of an individual or group of individuals' protected characteristics. So, what is the difference between equity and equality? So, equality means each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. However, equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. So you kind of need both really in there. The question would be, people might say, well, we need more women in STEM, in science, technology, and maths, and people might say, well, actually, no, if they're qualified for the job, they get the job, but that's not really the case in a male-dominated infrastructure. You might not get a lot of access, and you might say, oh, there's a lot of women in HR. It's not because women happen to have a special gift for HR. It's more that in industry, it's just certain pathways which are accessible and certain pathways that are not accessible. So what equity would do would look at how can we create equity to enable some of those people to have the same shot as someone who traditionally would just get a job. So what does diversity mean legally? So this applies to UK law. There are different mandates for international law. or European law, but we'll focus on this because I'm in the UK. So Equality Act 2010 is the most significant piece of equality legislation in the UK for many years. It simplifies, streamlined, and strengthened the law. It gave individuals greater protection from unfair discrimination. And if I put them up for you, you can see what the characteristics are. And we have age, gender, disability, race, ethnicity, sexuality, religion and belief, gender reassignment, pregnancy and maternity, marriage and civil partnership. Now, I've put asterisks on neurodiversity because it hasn't got its own section. It comes under disability. Now, the issue with that is it is self-defined if you're from that community. So some people who are neurodiverse will find it difficult to function in society. So they'll say, I'm neurodiverse and identify as having a disability. But some people who are neurodiverse do not identify as having a disability because they don't have those challenges. So I feel the law needs to change to accommodate that. Also, in terms of disability, there is societal disability. For example, if somebody uses a wheelchair and can't access a building because there isn't a ramp or a lift, that means the business is causing a problem because human beings come in every shape and size. So if you don't create access for a diversity of human being, you're creating disability. And there's that side of it as well. Another one is race, ethnicity. So we use the language of race, but race is a pseudo terminology with much language and ideas that we've adopted and kept over time. It was more introduced as a divisive element. So the reason I say ethnicity is because, for example, a rabbit and a frog can't wink at each other and then get into a relationship and have kind of tadpole bunnies because they're completely different species. However, someone could be from Germany, from Nigeria, from Venezuela, from Scotland, and have a family because we're the same species, which is why it's more ethnicity. The only thing that makes us different is that when we spread out on our route and we stopped at certain places, it was the flora and fauna of that place over millions of years that changed how we look cosmetically. And there will be physiological nuances, but very, very subtle. But we can share blood. We can save each other's lives. We can share organs because we're the same species. So we're going to look at understanding unconscious bias. Now, unconscious bias is very powerful. Even if we're not talking about inclusion, it's very powerful because our biases really shape everything. So I'm going to give you some definitions. Unconscious bias, or implicit bias, as it's also known, happens by our brains making incredibly quick judgments and assessments of people without us realizing. Affinity bias is the unconscious tendency to get along with others who are like us. It is easy to socialize and spend time with others who are not different. It requires more effort to bridge differences when diversity is present. And just off the bat, everyone has bias. It's the human condition. Bias is informed by who your family are, where you grew up, what you watched, who your friends were, that environment. So we all have bias. That's the first thing to remember. The issue isn't having the bias, it's how that bias would interfere with us forming healthy relationships or treating people equally and fairly and giving people opportunity. So looking at our biases and how they affect us in decision making in several different ways. So first of all, our perception, how we see people and interpret the world around us. Our behaviors, how we behave towards certain people, big gestures as well as micro behaviors. Our listening skills, to what extent we actively listen to what people say. Our attitude, how we react towards certain people. Our attention, how to apportion our attention. And our micro-affirmations, how much or how little we comfort people and help them to feel accepted or included. And perception is very powerful. For example, let's just say, you've had a great weekend and the sun's shining, you wake up on Monday, beautiful day, birds are singing, you get downstairs, if you drive, you get your car keys, if you commute, you've got your wallet, you look at the envelope, open up, there's a tax rebate, you get into work, no traffic, no delayed trains, you get in, Somebody says to you, how are you? You go, I'm great. Right, different context. This time I've had a bad weekend. Maybe for some reason had 4 hours sleep. You've had a row with a partner or a dear one. You wake up, got a cracking headache. It's raining. You stub your toe. The boiler's not working. You get a cold shower. You don't want a cold shower. You go downstairs, can't find the car keys. You get out. It's raining. You get into work. Loads of delays. Someone says to you, "How are you?" You go, "Don't even ask." So same person, but different experiences. So we're so subjective. Yeah, what we experience affects how we see the world. Now, the challenge is how do we hold ourselves so that we remain open, not perfect, but just open and not determined by the wind. So if it's a nice day, everything's happy. If it's a bad day, everything's sad. How do we not be at the mercy of the elements or other people's emotions? And absolutely, there is a clear relationship between unconscious bias, prejudice, and discrimination. It's not the same thing, but it's connected. Our unconscious bias can lead us to develop and rely on stereotypes about people. Reliance on stereotypes can in turn lead to prejudice, and prejudice can then lead to discrimination, behavior that treats people unequally. Now, the challenge with a stereotype is that they're a complete fallacy because there's no way you can't meet a stereotype, right? So, you stereotype someone and they will do the thing they've been stereotyped for, then you go, oh yeah, typical. But what a stereotype is abstracted human behavior. For example, humans commit crime. Now, the nature of the crime group of people or a person will commit will be based on the socioeconomic group that they're in or the climate they're in. For example, if you are in poverty, you're more likely to do low-level crime and steal for food or to buy stuff or whatever. However, if you're from an affluent community, the nature of your crime will be embezzlement and fraud. So it's a human behavior. So it sets someone up to always meet the stereotype. But there's a big distinction between a cultural behavior pattern and a stereotype. For example, a cultural behavior pattern is, if you're from the UK, is a high percentage that you've grown up drinking tea. So you wouldn't maybe like a cup of tea. Now, when I travel abroad, and they say, "Oh, would you like a hot drink?" Often say tea, and they go, "Oh, typical." You could say it's a UK behaviour pattern. So it's not a stereotype, and stereotypes are often negative. Behaviour patterns are not normally negative; they're associated with groups and their behaviour patterns. But again, that's a bit different. So there are many different types of biases, more than we've got here. But in the time, I can't go into them all. So we've got confirmation bias. People primarily search for bits of evidence that back up their opinions rather than looking at the whole picture. It's a bit like reading an article and cherry picking the things that suit your narrative and saying, "Yep, I've got evidence. Read that. It backs me up." Benevolence, when our efforts to be kind result in us making decisions on other people's behalf and take their choices away. Halo and horns, to focus on one particularly great or negative feature about a person, which clouds your view of them. It's a bit like somebody makes a mistake once, and then whatever they do, you say, "Oh, don't trust them. Don't trust them with that. No, they'll just mess it up." Or someone does one good thing, and you go, "Yeah, they're always amazing." You don't see the other things that aren't so amazing. Affinity bias, as I mentioned, connect with people who are most like you, and their gender bias, a preference for one gender over the other, often stems from deep-rooted beliefs about gender roles and stereotypes, and the racial or ethnic bias, engaging in discriminatory behavior, holding negative attitude toward or otherwise having less favorable reactions toward people based on their ethnicity. And these are all interesting. And a lot of these behaviors happen again in human behavior, right? Often groups which are traditionally marginalized within Western society will have a fear of halo or horns. So, for example, will be fearful of making a mistake because they're held to a different standard from, say, the accepted, considered norm or the generally accepted culture. So there will be a lot of stringency. I can't make a mistake, can't make a mistake. Things like that. Affinity bias is a bit like you can end up, if you work in the business, you can end up hiring yourself. So, for example, you're interviewing someone and, oh, where are you from? Oh, I grew up there. Oh, yeah, I know the place. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Where'd you go to uni? Oh, I went there. Oh, yeah. I should have sat the job here. Oh, yeah, me too. That's great. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, I love that show. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Come out and interview. Oh, they're amazing. They're great. Yeah, yeah. Oh, definitely hire them. Right. There's nothing wrong with connecting with someone. Not at all. Not at all. But it's more about, what is your decision based on? Were they the best for the job, or did you just connect with them because they're like you? And if you are, that means you are causing an inequity. That means if someone isn't like you, you won't connect with them, they won't get the job, whether or not they're good at the job or not, whether or not they're qualified. Okay. And that's how you get that kind of, if you look at a lot of businesses that aren't as open, you'll see three levels of trust, say. And say level three is the resources. If you've got a cafeteria, or or like caretakers, very diverse, right? As you get to level two, that's people you might work in office side by side, still diverse, not as much, but still pretty diverse. As you get to level one, which is like senior leadership, directors, tends to be homogenous groups, as in different versions of the same person, same ethnicity, but different at different age and stages, because people go into the default mode network if they're not aware of your own biases. So it doesn't mean you don't connect to people you like, but you make sure you don't hire people or promote people or connect to people just for that. And you create opportunity for others who are a bit different from you. But absolutely, there are many different barriers to inclusion as well. And I've got a video for you now.
What is implicit bias? Implicit bias is an attitude someone has, either positive or negative, without being aware of it. They're developed over a lifetime of exposure from other people and the media, and usually, these assumptions drive people's actions. These unconscious assumptions are often about race, gender, age, sexual orientation, and religion. An example? In one study, a group of doctors said they didn't have a bias toward people of color. But 2/3 were found to have an implicit bias against Black people and Latinos. This bias showed up in how the doctor communicated with the patient and whether the doctor showed concern for the patient. And this bias affected the care these patients received. In some cases, doctors recommended different treatment plans based on the patient's race or gender, which can impact health outcomes for those patients. We may be unaware of our own biases, but we need to work on recognizing and changing them to have a more equitable society.
So looking at some barriers to inclusion. In stressful situations, we go into autopilot, our default mode, and operate from our frame of reference, our bias. If we don't find strategies to bypass this factor, it can prohibit effectiveness, performance, and cohesion. Looking at micro-messaging. So micro-inequities and micro-affirmations and micro-advantages all fall within the broader category of micro-messaging. All represent three ways we send subtle messages, negatively or positively. Micro-inequities are subtle, often unconscious messages that devalue, discourage, and impair workplace performance. And, really push back an inclusive culture and create the wrong type of toxic culture, really. Don't make people feel good about themselves or want to be in the space. For even those who might not be in the receiving end, because they're within that community of how people are not being treated well. Got another short video for you.
What are microaggressions? Microaggressions are things we say or do, even if we don't mean to, that send negative and hurtful messages to people because of race, gender, class, or other factors. Microaggressions are subtle, like asking someone what country they are from. It seems innocent, but tells them they don't belong, that they are an outsider. Microaggressions are real. They negatively affect people's health and can lead to traumatic stress, depression, suicidal thoughts, or other mental health challenges. Microaggressions are a form of discrimination and erode our sense of belonging to one another.
I know you're going to think this is racist, but where are you from?
Where are you really from?
Where are you from? Glasgow. Nah, but where are you really from?
So, whereabouts in China is it you're from?
Where are you really from?
You're very articulate.
You're so articulate.
You're so articulate.
You don't sound like the rest of them.
You don't really sound black.
You didn't sound black on the phone.
You actually sound white on the phone.
This is what you mean to say.
How long you been here? Your English is very good.
I didn't expect you to sound so British.
Oh, you have a degree?
Oh, you're interested in graduate school? Okay.
What? You're the PE teacher?
Your boss is calling you.
Oh, how can you afford that house? How can you afford that car? How can you afford those clothes?
You don't look like a lawyer.
But are you a real psychologist?
You look like you smoke weed.
You should be able to rap.
You listen to rock music?
You should be good at climbing trees.
You know how to swim?
So, do you know karate?
Wouldn't they throw stones at you back home for walking around without a headscarf?
Is it true what they're saying?
Why is your hair like that?
Do you wash your hair?
Is that your real hair? Can I touch it?
That's not all your hair. I bet it's a weave. Let me touch it.
Can I touch the waves on your hair?
Can I touch your hair?
Oh. You're darker than I thought you would be.
I thought Japanese people were pale.
I didn't think your skin would be so smooth.
Wow. Your skin is soft. I wasn't expecting that.
Nice suntan.
Can you actually get a suntan?
You've got a good tan.
Yeah, I've just come back from holiday and it's so sunny. And look, Eleanor, I'm darker than you.
I'm blacker than you, and I'm white.
Wait, so you're not adopted?
You don't look like an Indian person.
You'd be very handsome if you weren't mixed heritage.
You look quite pretty for a black girl.
I've kissed a girl with bigger lips than yours.
Oh, you look ghetto today.
Who allowed you to foster him?
You're an absolute credit to your race.
I've kissed a girl with bigger lips than yours. But you're different. You aren't like most black people.
So diversity is being asked to party, inclusion is being asked to dance. So you can have visible diversity, but true inclusion means that people are part of the narrative, people are part of the conversation, and they feel empowered to be so. So now we're going to look at emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is the measure of an individual's abilities to recognize and manage their emotions and the emotions of other people, both individually and in groups. Well, it doesn't mean that you have to be a counselor or a therapist to everyone. What it means is just taking stock of where you are. And there are 5 key elements to it: self-awareness or self-reflection, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. I always say it's like you can't invite someone to dinner if your cupboards are bare, right? It's more about just being aware of how you feel, what your current level of energy is, and how open you are to engage with the world. And in so doing that, you are best placed to have a real, genuine connection with people, where you can actually say, well, these are the resources I'm dealing with, and this is where I am, and this is what I can give based on where I am. And then you can engage with people authentically and then be open to them and that's your self-regulation. And then find the motivation to connect, have empathy, walk in their shoes, and then the social skills to have a mindful relationship. So what I'd like to ask you to do individually is just reflect on, from 1 to 10, to rate what level of emotional intelligence you're applying to yourself, people you work with, your communities, or your family, when you're in a pressurized or stressful situation. From 1 to 10. How much emotional intelligence are you applying to yourself? And then also to consider, from 1 to 10, to rate what level of emotional intelligence your team, your colleagues, or your family are applying to you in a pressurized or stressful situation. And in a stressful situation, maybe you write down, if you haven't got a pen, you could do it on your phone. Or maybe you can hold it in your head to reflect on some key factors which can inhibit effective communication and good relationships and understanding. What gets in the way? What stops you from connecting? What stops you from communicating well? What stops you from listening? Now I'll just ask you also to reflect on how bias can have a negative impact at this time and how it can present itself. So if you've got a bias, as we all have, and we're not aware of it, in a stressful situation, how could it present itself that would add to the miscommunication? And just reflect on that. And maybe at the end, you could maybe come with some thoughts around that. So if a culture is truly inclusive, and what's important in this conversation, we've covered a range of things, and we've, in the time we've got, talked about gender neurodiversity. We've looked at impact of comments which not intentionally meant to be hurtful, but the impact they can have. But it's really, inclusion is a fundamental conversation. And recognizing bias is a fundamental conversation. You know, not just in terms of ethnicity. You know, I've known people with a very strong East End accent who would mask it because people would judge them for their intelligence. And these are people who would identify as the same ethnicity, but would look down on them thinking that, oh, you can't be intelligent because of how you talk. Equally, people that identify as being Welsh, and that's a real thing that happens. You know, equally, people who are neurodiverse, people could be quite disparaging. People who have had dyslexia can have horrible experiences in education because it hasn't been picked up, or if they've got ADHD and it hasn't been picked up, or even if it has been picked up, they could be looked at in a derogatory way. So it's an important conversation, just on a human level. So cultivating safe spaces and psychological safety. The term safe space generally means a place or environment in which a person or category of people can feel confident that they will not be exposed to discrimination, criticism, harassment, or any other emotional or physical harm. Psychologically safe workplaces are full of allies. Good leaders have the humility to learn how to be allies and then role model that behavior. I'll just absorb that for a minute. When you have a good team with a whole lot of opinions, good outcomes kind of happen without inclusion. How do you create spaces for people to have the right types of conversations? And psychological safety is the belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. At work, it's a shared expectation held by members of a team that teammates will not embarrass, reject, or punish them for sharing ideas, taking risks, or soliciting feedback. So we're going to look at some tips for psychological safety. So show your team or the people you work with that you're engaged. You can speak volumes without saying a word. Your body says a lot. Your facial expressions say a lot. Let your team see you understand, communicate, and demonstrate that you understand what the process is, what's going on for them. Avoid blame culture to build trust. If someone's struggling, the question is, what do we need to do to support that person to ensure that they feel equipped to do the best that they possibly can? What structures haven't we got in place to make sure everyone can thrive in this environment? Be self-aware. Demand the same from your team. Nip negativity in the bud. You know, society, human beings will always have negative behaviors, and any organization will be proportionally representative of society. It's more about having such a culture that when it arises, if there's no opportunity for it to thrive, and can nip it in the bud. Include your team decision making and be open to feedback, and champion your team and be an ally. So what is the difference between conscious and unconscious bias? So conscious bias is the biased attitudes about a certain group we're aware of. In conscious bias, we know we're being biased. We're doing it intentionally. For example, a person prefers to work with men rather than women, or a person doesn't like to associate with people with a different culture, and that's when it's conscious. But it's not enough to simply be aware of our biases. We must aim to be consciously inclusive. Conscious inclusion is building the desire, insight, and capacity of people to make decisions, do business, and to think and act with the conscious intent of including a diverse range of people in leadership. Conscious inclusion helps all employees to understand their own biases and their impact on those around them, to do or not do their best work. But how do we become consciously inclusive? Here's some tips for you. So, get to know yourself first, your identity, your forms of expression and attributes people may attach to you positively or negatively. It's becoming really self-aware, taking that journey. You know, there's a thing I can do with you which can help you to get to a place where you can safely identify where your biases can sit. We haven't got time in this hour, but you can do that. Set expectations and actions. Accept a wide variety of viewpoints. Instill a sense of mutual responsibility with agile frameworks. Talk about what is right and what is not. Address inequalities through open and honest dialogue. Educate your leaders. Form an inclusion council or working group. Celebrate employee differences. Listen to people. Hold more effective conversations and meetings. And communicate goals. Measure progress. Make it accountable. Important things to remember. Whether it's seen as bias, discrimination, or racism, the outcome for the recipients is the same. They're left feeling unwelcome, lonely or isolated, anxious, depressed, fearful, and unsafe, angry, frustrated, stressed, unusual, and strange, confused or unsure about whether they've experienced racism or what. This is especially true if others ignore or deny their experiences. It can make them question their reality, and this is sometimes referred to as gaslighting or racial gaslighting. Feeling forced to suppress how they feel, they become overwhelmed or worn down. And some more tips for you. How to mitigate unconscious bias. Acknowledge it, don't beat yourself up. Learn to mistrust first impressions. Slow down your thought process. Recognize and acknowledge our personal biases. Identify how they impact on our behavior, relationships, and decision-making. Review decisions we make about people, processes, to ensure we are being objective. Make sure we rely on facts and hard evidence rather than our gut feelings or making assumptions. And be aware of how our biases may be apparent in our micro behaviours. And consider whether we acknowledge certain people's ideas or contributions more than others. And lastly, looking at positive micro-affirmations. Positive micro-affirmations can be used as part of an antidote for micro-inequities, and they're small, everyday gestures that communicate respect and make people feel valued. And, just by greeting individuals genuinely, making eye contact, depending on where they sit culturally, or some people who happen to be neurodiverse don't engage in eye contact too much, smiling, using people's names, using open body language and active listening, hearing people, not waiting to respond, asking questions to show interest in others and giving credit. So, 5 stages of conscious inclusion: learning about our biases, proactively learning about our biases, recognizing where they show up and acting intentionally to challenge them, building key skills, developing skills such as listening, openness, humility, and allyship to act more inclusively, developing relationships, being intentional about welcoming diverse perspectives into my work and worldview, becoming a champion, role modeling behaviors that build inclusion, speaking up and challenging non-inclusion, and getting results, linking inclusion to business outcomes. Teams that feel better do better. As you step into the world, it's an infinite cosmos. It's the principle of exploration and understanding, and it's boundless. You learn about yourself through others, forever learning and discovering new things. Any questions?
We've got one question from Deborah. Deborah, I'll read it out, and then if you've got anything to add, you can add it. How do you balance nipping negativity in the bud with allowing people to truly express themselves?
Well, that's a good question. I think it depends on the environment, but what I would say is every work environment has a boundary. It's very challenging socially because it's kind of like free for all, right? But in a professional environment, you've got the boundary of why are you there, what's your purpose, what's your focus. By having that role, you've committed to the values of that organization. That's one thing. So is it within the context of the culture there that it's appropriate to be hurtful with your comments? Now, expressing yourself, if you expressing yourself, not you, but if one expresses themselves means that you're going to demoralize someone, put them down, make them feel bad about themselves, then that isn't just being yourself. And it goes back to banter. Now, banter is playful exchange of remarks, have healthy relationship, good humor. What banter isn't is making someone feel small, targeting them personally, or kind of picking on aspects of their personality or their body to make them feel bad. So what I would say to that, there's a difference between somebody having a misunderstanding and kind of not being accountable for what you say, and not being mindful, conscientious of somebody else's feelings. So that isn't being yourself, if that makes sense.
Deborah, I hope that helped. There's one from Julia here. What is a reasonable way to ask someone where they're from? Because you generally want to know.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say this one. So I would no, I'll give back the what is the purpose of the ask, right? So for example, a few years ago there was a lot in the news about the situation. The issue I have with the media, they don't really communicate things, in a really kind of open way. So the videos I shared with you, they kind of put it more in context. There's a difference between othering someone and, if you have an interest in someone's cultural background, you'd have a relationship with the person. So for example, you connect with a person first, right? You get to know them. You build a relationship, and in the context of that relationship, you have enough trust and safety. Say, look, you've got such an unusual name. Look, you've got such an unusual look, and I can't quite place you. I'd be really interested to know what your background is. That's a way of asking the question. If you've just met someone and there's no context, no relationship, and you say, "Oh, where are you from?" It might feel a bit awkward. But again, in a different way, if you're socially, maybe you're at a party or something like that, and you think someone's really, really striking, you say, look, I really don't mean to be rude. I just find, it's positive. I really find you quite striking. I've never seen anyone like you. Clearly, you're from here, but what's your origin? What makes you who you are? right? What's the purpose of your inquiry? You know, why are you asking? What happens like with the videos? If it's the person was saying, you're not from here, you don't belong here, you know, that's why it rubs people the wrong way. It's like, you know, you're not really from here. Oh, where are you from? Oh, I grew up in Hackney. Oh, in Hackney. No, but where are you really from? You're not really from Hackney. Well, yeah, my mum and dad were born there. When I was born there. Yeah, but where are you? But you know, that's where it's like, you know, you're just saying you're not really from here, and that's quite challenging. For example, if you're someone who is third, fourth generation, you don't know anywhere else. So what you meant to say, you know, you can still be, you can say, well, look, my ancestry is X, but this is where I'm from. But that's not what the question is. Right? You see, it gets a bit different.
Thanks, Julia. I hope that helped. Thanks, Tal. Any more questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or put a virtual hand up. You must have answered everything, Tal, because there's no questions.
Well, I think what I found interesting was like those videos on the microaggressions, and some of them were quite confronting. It was like I probably said things like that without the intention. But the one I wrote down was "You're so articulate," and it was puzzling to me. It was like, huh, I'm pretty much sure I've said out you're so articulate, but not in a way that meant any offense, but maybe it's a unconscious bias or something. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and you know, bless you for being open about that as well. And it's a safe space, so I appreciate you sharing. So what it is, it works like this. So it's the idea, for example, that I'm not saying that's where you are with it, but it's more that it's the assumption that almost like, oh, you can speak, well, you can speak English. Wow, you speak English really well. Wow. Well, how did you? It's the implication of like, wow, you're intelligent enough to learn English, you know, and it's like, why wouldn't someone know English, if that makes sense? In terms of human beings and development of the world, English is a pretty common language, if that, you know, so it is that kind of assumption, which is why it would come across as offensive. You know, in this day and age, you know, from a science perspective, every human, we're one family. So every human, no matter who you are, what part of the country, the world you're from, your common ancestor would have been from Africa, when that's where the migration come out and spread everywhere else. So we're one family anyway. That's first thing. But also in terms of you know, the UK, for example, has been forever mixed. It's not even that new. It seems like it is, but I mean, historically, I mean, even during the wartime, before the wartime, before then, you know, that's what humanity is. So I think it would be received in that way, in a negative sense, if say, oh, are you questioning, you know, why wouldn't I be able to speak English, if that makes sense.
Great, thanks, Tal.
Well said. Yeah, well said. Cheers for sharing that.
No, not at all.
Great. Thank you, Talmud, for sharing all that with us. It's really some interesting thoughts and conversations, and definitely spurred some thoughts for me as well. So no, it's really good. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us.